And now it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote. We are so excited to have Byron Hurt with us today. Byron, your work speaks to our vision of racial justice and gender equity, and we knew you would be such a good fit for the messaging we wanted to convey at this summit. We found you, we sought you, we figured out how to connect with you, and we were so thrilled that you made this a priority, and we're thrilled to have your daughter with us today, too. You will notice on your table you have index cards. If you have questions for Byron through his talk, please write them on the cards and raise your hand, and we'll come and collect them. And if we have time at the end, Byron will answer some questions. Byron Hurt is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, lecturer, published writer, and anti-sexist activist. He is also the former host of the Emmy-nominated series Real Works with Byron Hurt. His documentary, Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and broadcast on the PBS series Independent Lens. He's a former Northeastern University football quarterback and was also a founding member of the Mentors in Violence Prevention Program, which is the leading college-based rape and domestic violence prevention initiative for college and professional athletics. Byron has also served as an associate director of the first gender violence prevention program in the U.S. Marine Corps. His writings have been published in several anthologies, and his film, Soul Food Junkies, is critically acclaimed and won the CNN Best Documentary Award at the American Black Film Festival and Best Documentary at the Urban World Film Festival in New York City. It also premiered nationally on PBS. As a member of a fraternity, he is now in production for his upcoming film about hazing, an important issue in our time, and he's also an adjunct professor at Columbia University. Please join me in welcoming Byron Hurt.
Thank you very, very much for the introduction, Deborah, and thank you, Deanna, for humoring me and by showing a couple of clips from my work. The first one was Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. How many people have seen that film or heard of that film? Just by a show of hands, thank you very much. I appreciate it. That film was a film that I created I released back in 2006, and it was a film designed to question and interrogate the representations of masculinity in rap music and hip-hop culture. And that particular scene that you watched was a scene that brought you all down to Daytona Beach, Florida, where I went down to interview rap music, hip-hop executives, and artists to talk to them about representations of manhood and misogyny in hip-hop. And what happened on the Daytona street is what you actually saw in the video. There were a lot of sexual assaults and sexual harassment that took place every single day, all day, and it was my hope and my desire to document that kind of event, to include in the film, to hopefully get people to talk and think critically about both the representations of heterosexual masculinity in rap music and hip-hop culture, but how cultural attitudes lead to behaviors that can be really destructive. And the second clip that you saw is a clip from my upcoming film about hazing, which will examine the nature of many pledge processes that exist in our country for organizations and clubs and sports teams and fraternities. And it's a film that I'm about 3 years in the making. I've done a lot of research for that project, and so I want you to be on the lookout for it because I believe it's going to be a very big film once it hits the culture. And you are among some of the very first as you see a very tiny clip of what is going to be, I think, a very important film that will deconstruct the culture of hazing in America. So thank you very much for watching. My goal as a filmmaker and as an activist is to use the platform of documentary filmmaking to stimulate and create dialogue in this country about manhood, masculinity, and male culture. I want to thank you all for coming out and being a part of this event. and I know that Jane Doe thanks you as well. I thank all of you who traveled across the state and across the country to attend this event. Thank you to the people in attendance for making a commitment to these issues, which are very important issues, and I'm sure that we all can agree with that. And I want to thank you all for taking a stand against gender-based violence. Thank you to those of you who are often viewed as being on the margins of our society. And thank you for the people who take risks every day just by being who you are and by being authentically you. I also want to thank the male-identified people in this room who are asking very deep questions about what healthy masculinity looks like, especially in these times. You should all give yourself another round of applause just for answering JDI's call to hashtag Reimagine Manhood. Give yourself a round of applause. I want to thank Deborah and also Deanna and Tony for all of their support in getting me here today. They took really great care of me and made sure I had everything that I needed for my presentation. And this can't be easy, to put a presentation and put a conference together like this. Coordinating schedules and getting everybody in the room to engage men on these issues. Putting on a conference like this is a major undertaking, am I right? Okay. And the one thing I learned about interacting with Deborah and Tony and Deanna via email is that they operate like a very well-oiled machine. So I'm not surprised that they got this done. I'm not surprised that they were able to get all of you in this room. And we're all here. So give yourselves a round of applause for being here. I also want to thank my daughter, Masai, who's sitting right in front of me, for joining me today. My wife and I decided to homeschool our daughter this year, and we joined a homeschooling collective. So my daughter's been traveling around the country with me as part of her learning experience. A couple of weeks ago, we went down to Savannah, Georgia, Hilton Head, South Carolina, right? And Charleston, South Carolina. And we visited the old Slave Mart and the Penn Center, which is formerly the Penn School, which is one of the first schools for freed African Americans after slavery. And so we're trying to give her a very strong foundation in terms of her culture. And later on this afternoon, we're going to go over to the Worcester Art Museum, and we're going to take in this exhibit, a photo exhibit about African American communities in Worcester that have reemerged. So I'm really looking forward to going to that exhibit with my daughter. And you also check it out too if you have the time. I'm really curious to see it. And so I want to give my daughter an opportunity to meet people like you all and to learn more about the kind of things that people are doing in this room to help combat gender-based violence. I think that would be a really great part of her experience as a young girl, to see that there are people out here in this world who are standing up to protect her and to create a better world for her. If you're not familiar with my work, you've just seen a glimpse of the kind of films that I create as a way to stimulate dialogue and create awareness about masculinity and gender violence prevention. But I also have a lot of experience in this field facilitating workshops and trainings and educating and also learning a lot about what boys and men can do to end physical and sexual violence. I think what's useful today and what I bring to the table as your speaker is my experience working with various groups of people from all walks of life, from all kinds of backgrounds, showing my work as a documentary filmmaker and engaging in sometimes very difficult and challenging conversations about gender violence prevention and toxic masculinity, with the goal of inspiring us all to ask for and to pursue healthier versions of manhood, and to encourage boys and men to feel more comfortable expressing the full range of emotions and identities. That's what I've spent most of my adult life doing, and hopefully you'll find what I do and what others in this room do to be inspiring, motivational, and helpful to the work that you do, or maybe will help to add to your own personal growth. I've had the opportunity and the privilege to travel this country and to speak to students at colleges and universities from Harvard to Yale to Princeton to Stanford University to Howard to Hampton and Spelman College to small grassroots community organizations to men in prisons and jails and young boys in youth detention centers and in dilapidated, underperforming schools. I've spoken at conferences like these, and I've had conversations with U.S. Marines, members of the U.S. Air Force, Army, and Navy. I've led workshops and closed room sessions with fraternity members and Division I athletes. I've led workshops and closed room sessions with fraternity members, same gender-loving black men, and multiracial audiences of young people with various gender and sexual identities. I've had the unique experience of leading many of these conversations in mixed gender spaces, but also in single-sex spaces as well, with boys and men separated from girls and women. And in those meetings with the boys and men, I have to say, there have been some very interesting conversations. Some of you have done this work as well, and if so, I commend you and I respect you and I appreciate you for all of the work that you do. And if you have not yet had the opportunity to facilitate conversations about masculinity with groups of boys and men, but desire to do so, I encourage you to look into getting the necessary training required to prepare yourselves for the task at hand. And when you begin to do that work, you will find it humbling, challenging, difficult, but also very instructive about the world of masculinity. You will also realize what I and so many other people in this room currently know, that many cisgendered men are simply not well educated about how to intervene and prevent physical and sexual violence, to live in peace and harmony with people who are gay, lesbian, or trans, and we're not very well prepared to grow into healthy, authentic human beings. And what do I mean by that? I mean, we are not groomed to feel secure about our identity, where we fully respect people who are not straight, and where we see ourselves as allies to girls and women and to the LGBTQ community. Instead, many of us see ourselves in opposition to them, and that has to change. We are still very much in need of more models of masculine identities that free us from the limiting and oftentimes self-defeating ideas about manhood, whether it's emotional, physical, or sexual violence against others, or unhealthy behaviors turned inward, leading to violence, depression, self-medication, suicide, or other self-sabotaging behaviors. We are right now in the midst of an opportunity to change what so many people refer to as toxic masculinity, and turn manhood into something healthy, diverse, and life-affirming. The Me Too movement, where women, and to a smaller degree men from various racial and ethnic backgrounds, are courageously coming forward to address the sexual violence that has disrupted and changed their lives. This should be seen as a moment for all of us to grow and to evolve, particularly as boys and men. This is a point in time that has been in the making for generations, as Deanna mentioned in her opening. This moment has been birthed by the labor and the leadership of many women, male allies, and queer people who have worked alongside them to change rape culture and to create a space for victims to safely come forward to tell their stories. For years, women and a growing number of men have been calling on us to do more, and today, a call of action to reshape the culture of masculinity has been issued by Jane Doe Inc. And with all that's going on culturally and politically in our society, it couldn't be more timely. There are many of you here this morning who understand this need, who fully realize that rape culture and the culture of masculinity are interwoven and interconnected, but that this connection has often gone overlooked. Many people who benefit from male privilege would rather look for the source of physical and sexual violence elsewhere rather than looking at the culture of masculinity. But this conference has gotten it right. Our time, energy, and focus should be directed squarely on the issues that will be addressed here today. So thank you for showing up, and thank you for being here. It's important. You're important. Your presence is important. Your mind and spirit and creative energy are all very important. And each of you represent a piece of a very large puzzle that can create something new, that can create change right now, in real terms and in real time. You are a part of the solution to many of these deeply problematic and troubling problems and the stories that we're waking up to in the morning every single day. You are all valuable assets to the movement to end gender-based violence, to help further the development of authentic manhood. You are needed here today. I'm looking forward to being in conversation with you about race and class and gender justice throughout the day, all of which are intersectional issues, meaning you can't talk about racial justice without talking about gender justice. You can't talk about gender justice without talking about racial justice. You can't talk about poverty without talking about concentrations of wealth and power. You can't talk about sexuality without talking about various sexual identities, homophobia and transphobia. You can't talk about police brutality against people of color without talking about trans and gender-based violence. These are all, as many of you already know, hugely important social issues that have their own set of unique characteristics and qualities that need to be addressed and overcome. But they are all interconnected with each other. And if we fail to understand that fact, we will continue to work against social injustice and oppression in silos, isolated from one another. We will never realize our commonalities and shared struggles. We will never harness our collective strength and power. And furthermore, all of the above-mentioned issues will remain unresolved until we address them together, standing up for each other and showing up for each other. Because as James Baldwin famously said, "For if they take you in the morning, they will be coming for us that night." We must engage these issues fully with honesty, integrity, transparency, humility, with the ultimate goal of making this world a safer place for people of color, girls, including girls of color, women, including women of color, and the LGBTQ community, including LGBTQ people of color. We cannot leave them behind. We also have to make those who do identify as boys and men feel safe too, because we know that boys and men are also victims of violence and sexual violence, often at the hands of other men. We must get to the root causes of gender-based violence and call attention to the culture of toxic masculinity, not deflect. We must acknowledge the harm it causes and change it. That's where you all come in today. We want you to take action and change this with your innovative ideas, intellectual power, and your uniqueness. It has been my experience and the experience of many of you in this room, I'm sure, that this is a culture, and I'm referring to the culture of masculinity, that would prefer to remain unacknowledged and unchallenged so that it doesn't have to be held accountable, and to do the very difficult work of looking inward and seeing our flaws, to see that we cis men are in fact a huge part of the problem when it comes to gender-based violence. In choosing to avoid looking at ourselves in the mirror and questioning male culture, we are choosing to pass up the transformative power of self-examination, self-reflection, self-correction, growth, and healing. Now, do you all want to grow and become better men, all of the men in this room? I know I do. Jane Doe Inc. knows that we have to keep the lens where it ought to be directed, at us, boys and men, so that the toxic masculinity I speak of, the violent masculinity that causes harm to other human beings, will end. We must do the soul-searching necessary to make manhood healthier and more humane. And when we reimagine manhood, when we dissect it, play around with it, examine it, and pay close attention to how it has been constructed, we can begin to deconstruct it and work toward meeting some of the qualities that healthy masculinity is comprised of: compassion, empathy, love, fairness, equality, patience, tenderness, warmth, vulnerability, openness, and honesty. Conferences like this are crucial to moving the ball forward and advancing gender relations, not setting it back 100 years like some men in power would like to do. The Trump administration, crusty old retrogrades like Steve Bannon and Roy Moore, and the 70-plus male public figures who have been recently accused of sexual assault. No, we can't go backward. Too many of us have worked too hard to bring about progress and level the playing field. We have to push back against the pushback. And thankfully, the people in Alabama, a deeply red state, did just that on Tuesday night. Today's conference is important because we too can show the world that there are people struggling with what masculinity means in 2017, but who are working to create new definitions and are setting positive examples of healthy masculinity as leaders in our communities, on our teams, at our schools, and at home. We can show the world that there are men in leadership positions, men who have great influence on young people, who don't buy into toxic masculinity and who want to end rape culture. Men who are not interested in returning to doing things the way this country did things back in 1818, when enslaved Africans had no rights, when women had no rights, when gay people had no rights, when transgender people had no rights. No, we're not going back to that time. We're moving forward progressively into 2018, and we are together ending racism, ending misogyny, ending misogynoir, ending homophobia and transphobia with our bravery and our courage and our intellect and our authenticity. We have to stand up and push back against the pushback from insecure men and some women too, who are afraid of the progress made by people of color, the gay community, women and transgender people. The conversations that will take place today will undoubtedly be in direct opposition to the backlash of Trumpism, white male supremacy, misogyny, and misogynoir. And these are great things to discuss. It's great to be in opposition with white supremacy and heterosexism and violence against women. And I'm very proud of you to accept Jane Doe's challenge of redefining masculinity. Some of the most powerful leaders of our time have stood bravely in the face of oppressive people and institutions. Today will be rich and life-affirming for all of you who are bravely challenging and engaging in genuine and thoughtful conversations and in debates. hopefully we can inspire other people around us to follow our lead and the lead set forth by Jane Doe Inc. They understand that in the absence of these much-needed intersectional discussions about racial justice, gender-based violence, homophobia, and transphobia, that these problems will continue and may worsen. They know, like I know, and that many of you know, that growing discontent, resentment, and anger will fester and sit in a highly pressurized powder keg until it eventually explodes, as they have been recently, with wounded but strong, brave voices of victims and survivors, each with a new story to tell. Individuals whose bodies have been violated without any accountability or justice. This is ultimately why we are seeing such great progressive political movements in this decade. Hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Me Too. Movements, I should say, founded by black queer women and a straight black woman, respectively, created for the purpose of addressing intersectional racial violence and gender oppression experienced by people of color, black girls and black women in particular. And I must acknowledge these women explicitly. Otherwise, to be quite honest, if we don't, their leadership will be overlooked and overshadowed by people seeking to take credit for the labor of black women's work. We cannot and should not participate in the marginalization of the talent and boldness of black women who lead. So I want to take a minute to shout out the names of Alicia Garza, Police Colors, Opal Tometi, and Tarana Burke, the women who created the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movements, respectively. And I want to shout out the 98% of black women and the 93% of black men in Alabama who voted for Doug Jones and rejected the xenophobia of Roy Moore. This is not a digression. I make this point to say that these movements and cultural shifts don't just happen. They happen in response to cisgendered men taking advantage of power and privilege and status as if they're birthright. They happen because victims who feel aggrieved get tired of remaining silent, feeling shamed or othered. They happen when people get tired of having their basic human rights violated. They happen when people who know they deserve better treatment and boldly stand up and resist. They happen because of people in this room like you. When we remain silent as passive bystanders who idly stand in the face of racism and sexism and homophobia or transphobia, we are complicit and help to perpetuate toxic masculinity. Through silence, we help or mute or isolate the voices of those who have been traumatized or wronged. And we can't remain silent about gender-based violence. In the words of Ida B. Wells, who I absolutely love because she spoke about lynching during a time when it was very dangerous and very risky to do so. She said the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. Let's tell the truth about these issues, and let's tell the truth about who we are as men. Let's tell the truth about this national reckoning, which is here, and people are demanding that their voices be heard. In the words of one of my greatest heroes, Frederick Douglass, who fought for both racial and gender justice, power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will. The human beings in our global community are demanding that we recognize the pain that we are causing, that we acknowledge it, and that we account for it. They are asking us to stop hurting them, and we must respond to these voices by listening to them, owning up to our transgressions, and by changing ourselves for the better. In light of the national reckoning that is taking place right now in our culture, today, we all in this room stare bravely into the eyes of those who refuse to change or who hunker down in old models of masculinity and say, "Not me. I am offended by your racism. I don't agree with your sexism. I don't support your homophobia. I can't ride with you and your transphobia. I can't get down with your classism." We have to let people know that we are proudly embracing a more healthy, more holistic vision of masculine identities and we are telling the world this is who we really are. Today, we are redefining and reimagining manhood. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.